me change a few things on my side. All right, let's see here. Do we mute everybody, Abhishek? Mute everybody, and then we're gonna not allow anybody to have the ability to unmute themselves. That's what's going on if you see that. But don't worry, you'll get opportunities to still engage via our chat, and then at the end we'll have some Q&A, and we'll have an opportunity to make some video comments as well. We just don't want somebody accidentally unmuting. Some embarrassing conversation. So let's see. Okay. Start us on the Facebook and we'll get kicked off. Good morning and welcome to Houston Oasis. We are glad that all of you could join us both here in the Zoom and then also over on Facebook Live. We've got a great lineup for you this morning. If this is your first time engaging with Oasis in any way, shape, or form, we are a secular community that meets weekly here in Houston. Right now we're meeting virtually, so this is the best way to meet with us. Some of our core values include, oh, just a second, I've got to turn off some audio on my side. Some of our core values include people are more important than beliefs and reality is known through reason. So if those sound like good things to you, then you're in the right place. Every week we have excellent talks and excellent music, and we always kick it off with that. This week we're excited to welcome back somebody that's played for Houston Oasis before. Houston Oasis, I'd like you to welcome Glen Ackerman and Henry Durag, the Glen Ackerman Duo. And yeah, you guys might have to unmute yourself. I think we might have. Perfect.
Hello, everyone. Go 1, 2, 3. us. Hope that sounded good to you. Was the sound levels okay? Nothing's changed?
Yeah, guys, it sounded really great. And actually, I'm going to cut in before your second tune here this morning because we had some technical difficulties over on the Facebook. So just a second, I'm going to reintroduce you guys for people that may not have heard you.
Henry's last name is Dara, by the way.
Welcome to Houston Oasis, everybody. We had our first run. We had a little bit of technical difficulties with the sound. We appreciate it. Houston Oasis is a secular community that meets here in Houston, Texas every week with great music and great talks. Those of you that heard some of the music earlier, we wanted to reintroduce our musicians for you this morning, the Glen Ackerman Duo with Glen Ackerman and Henry Dara, or excuse me, I should say, Henry Dara on the keys. And so we'll go back over to those guys for another tune. Take it away, guys.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. If you heard the last song we did was called Well You Needn't, super funky tune. We're going to play another upbeat, lively tune called Blues for Alice. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3,
Okay, I think it's my turn. That was great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm audible. I am. Great. I am Joshua Richards. If anybody has forgotten my name in quarantine, I know I might have forgotten a couple of years. I'm very sorry. I have the great joy of introducing our main speaker today, who is a friend of mine and also somebody I got to know when I was going to grad school. So I'm going to go ahead and read a short bio about him and bring him on up to speak. Andrew Bennett has worked in the field of applied behavior analysis as a registered behavior technician for almost 6 years, including 3 years at the University of Houston at Clear Lake, my alma mater, as part of the grant-funded project ABA Academy for Problem Behavior, helping social education teachers develop ABA-based solutions for challenging behavior. He's part of the LoneStar LEND program with Judy Blake and was a co-facilitator of the Abuse and Assault Prevention and Education Group, Sphere of Safety at Lee College. He is also a traveler and volunteer with the nonprofit organization Global Autism Project, which supports and trains staff in ABA centers around the world. And he has done all of these things while living with autism. He didn't mention this in his bio, so I will. He is a third-degree black belt, and he is a voracious appreciator of music. And he's somebody who I really enjoyed getting to meet in college because he has just this real zeal for life, and he's somebody who I enjoy his company. He definitely thinks very differently about a lot of important things than I do, but he's always somebody I've really enjoyed getting to talk to. So without further ado, let's welcome my friend Andrew Bennett.
Okay. All right, everyone can see the screen. Okay. Well, as Josh said, my name is Andrew Bennett, and I do have autism, and it's an essential, important part of my life. And I've discovered more and more about how it manifests in my life over the years. And as I have grown gradually in my understanding of that, as well as grown on the quest to speak as many languages as I possibly can, I have learned to see autism just like its own little language. And it's something that people need to learn to understand and appreciate in order to really communicate and get to know people. And just like you learn to speak a friend's language, or you learn a lot of other things in life that help you to communicate when there are barriers. So if I were to ask you, do you speak a foreign language? It would actually be a trick question, because all of you do. You may have learned the lingo of your job or your hobby like it was a foreign language. Now, nowadays, we know science will tell us that learning a foreign language can improve your cognitive ability and decision-making and your memory. So imagine what it would benefit people if they become more understanding and welcoming if we learn to speak all of the secret languages of all the hidden sub-societies that we belong to. Now, this isn't true here of every world language, which you see on the screen, but the word autism is borrowed by all 5 of the languages that I actively study and use. From the top, they're English, French, Czech, Spanish, and Indonesian, which is a strange assortment of languages. And the reason being, in July 2019, I traveled with the nonprofit organization Global Autism Project to support ABA services in the Czech Republic. Now, I ruminated upon our motto as I was presenting my life story to local professionals and parents. Autism knows no borders. Fortunately, neither do we. Now, I thought nobody else in my group that I traveled with spoke any Czech or had autism. So I felt that I was not just responsible for translating between our language and theirs, but the world of autism and the general world around us. And so on that day, I learned that autism is like a foreign language that many people don't understand. Since then, I've taught to teach the world that autism is a universal language. And by that, principally, I mean that autism affects 1 in 160 people worldwide, but its most common traits are universal. The DSM-5 diagnostic manual states autism is a developmental disorder that impairs social interaction and communication, and it leads to restricted or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior, and maybe sensitivity or lack thereof to sensory stimuli and things in the environment. But consider that autism is like a spectrum. Even amidst one united language, there's always many different dialects, ways of expression, slang, unique words and qualities. Just like English language might sound different in Scotland or even Australia than it does here. I didn't have any typical red flags of autism like delayed speech or learning that some of you might be more familiar with. But I lacked interest in peers growing up and had very specific routines and rituals, such as I wouldn't mix food on my plate growing up. And I would always, whenever I went to the local fabric store, insist on organizing all the buttons before I left. I struggled to cope with setbacks and sudden change, such as if my friend couldn't come over to play, it messed up my whole day. Or if I used to play chess a lot, and when I lost an easy game in a tournament, I got very down on myself. My interests were very limited, but very focused. And this is a common thing among many of us as well. So things I was interested in childhood include Hot Wheels, The Price is Right, and Michael Jordan. I was prone to talking about these things constantly, even when others lost interest. But those interests are very passionate. Now, in the 1990s, you'd look at this and say, it's all Greek to me, because you wouldn't understand what it came from. Now, even today, the signs of autism may appear invisible to people compared to more obvious physical conditions that we might have. On closer inspection, though, you might suspect something is not normal or typical, and you might even assume such a person to be aloof, crazy, clumsy, or even possibly dangerous or sinister, not knowing any better. And before the 1960s, people with autism were actually commonly institutionalized because there was nothing apparently wrong with them to explain their behavior, which could be actually very detrimental in places and times absent of the awareness that I hope the world has. And thankfully, this rate has indeed dropped 80% since then. But we do face many dangers still. It's always been my parents' worst fear that I'd be among those people shot by police due to not responding or complying to commands, tagged as potential criminals when there's no outward evidence to the contrary. Now, in some foreign countries, especially those who have more traditional beliefs, autism might be interpreted as a curse. And there was even a publicized case in 2001 of a Pakistani boy who sought and received political asylum in the United States to escape what waited for him in his home country. And this is why therapies and other support like applied behavior analysis and organizations like the Global Autism Project exists, so that we can overcome such tragic misunderstanding, but through education in the language that's so foreign that we might find it barbaric. Until we realize that autism is actually something very unique and fascinating that teaches us about the diverse human experience. Now, we're lucky to live in a very multicultural city here, Houston. 145 different languages are spoken here. So you can probably travel the metro. Imagine hearing people jabbering in a foreign language. And even if you don't know what it means, you just know instinctively it's not a language that you know. And people that don't speak the language of autism might deem it foreign gibberish and treat people like we unfortunately sometimes treat our foreigners and tell them to speak English or get out. Now, do you think that xenophobia has really been eradicated from our society, or does it just mutate into a different strain? A person with autism might be treated like a foreigner asked to assimilate at the cost of their identity. We talk about inclusion of people with autism, and it's such a misinterpreted word. It's not a special autism classroom, because that really just builds a wall between us and the outside world. It's integration into the world with respective requisite supports that benefit each of us, just like we take care to treat each child or each employee at our job differently. And we never really compromise who people with autism are. Now, me in my early education, I was gradually mainstreamed into general ed classrooms during elementary school. I still had some specialized supports, but really the best support was my peers who were neurotypical. In college, I was also treated kindly by almost every professor and made several friends, some of which I still have, including, of course, Josh. And in between, though, I did suffer a lot of bullying and intolerance from teachers and classmates without the time, money, or patience for me. And it's a sad reality that the special education system sometimes still fails people like myself. It strained my family almost too much. But fortunately, I've so far seen in 2 years as an ABA therapist working with special education teachers that we've come such a long way in becoming bilingual in autism. But I also know that we're not yet fluent, so our teaching has to go on. Now, one main obstacle to our success in this world is communication difficulties. It's estimated that 1/3 of people with autism are nonverbal. Those who are unable to express themselves may engage in problematic behaviors such as screaming, aggression, or head hitting when they're young. But even verbal individuals struggle with communication. I myself wasn't really born with or trained in the art of communication. So I worked really hard in my adulthood to express my emotions and needs, to become more vulnerable, to advocate for myself, to be more confident in speaking my mind and setting boundaries for how I expect to be treated. And we may have very high tolerance for abusive, unhealthy, or toxic relationships or jobs. And then when we get to that moment where emotion suddenly overtakes spoken word, we just say exactly what we feel. One persistent myth about autism is that we can't understand or read emotions and lack empathy. Experts told my parents growing up that there was no hope for me to learn these skills and connect with other humans. And for most of my teenage years, I was left to my own devices until enough time and faith were put into my abilities to do so. Nowadays, I journal about my emotions 3 times a day, among many other things I do for myself. And I found myself growing gradually in my ability to read, define, and express my own emotions as well as those of others, as I become acquainted with and befriend myself. I like to say befriend myself because people with autism often struggle to make and keep true friends. People learning English as a second language are confounded by its magical ability to never pronounce the same letter the same way. Similarly, friendship is like an art that may feel like a grammatical rule with more exceptions than truths, like I before E except after C and however it ends. Almost all of my friends are those that I've made this decade in my 20s. I haven't always spent as much time with them as I wanted to. Now, all of us need friends, social opportunities to grow. And despite what we've been taught about how to make friends, we often find the best way to learn to make friends and socialize is just to keep doing it. Now, many organizations, such as places of worship or one faith or another, or of no faith whatsoever, in particular nowadays, are one thing that's definitely advanced. They develop formal social groups for young adults, and these sorts of things help me find community and sense of belonging. These young adult groups and other activities I am part of, like a French club, volleyball, sports groups, they've helped me maintain a strong social network and fostered authentic friendships that enhance but do not take over my life. And that's one thing that I found very important. Because in the past, I'd feel very lonely and miserable, and I'd realize that I could be very codependent on my friends. But lately, I've begun to start to feel much more interdependent. I feel a lot more welcomed into my social circle and respected for who I am and what my uniqueness brings to the table and to the world. This has made me significantly happier. It's a quest that I'm still on, but it's one that's growing easier day by day. Now, one thing that definitely changed all of that was the age of social distancing, which gifted me the time and chance to befriend and understand myself first, to know and own my own needs, wishes, skills, and beliefs. And I hope that everybody gets a chance to do that right now. I've long fought to find my identity in knowing others, but I've learned at last that it must come from knowing you. Something I've thought of recently in this time of solitude is that the struggle to be you is a struggle against the fear of what others think of you. But when you know and love yourself, no matter what others think of you, you can always depend on being your best friend. One other common thing that we face are what we call sensory difficulties, or struggles handling certain things that appeal to our senses. So I personally might be fixated on one noise or other stimulus, like a particular favorite song or a conversation in another language that I'm curious to try to listen to what they're saying. It kind of goes off in their head like the loud party animal that makes you forget everything everyone else said all night. I could get tired out by heat, hard surfaces, and humidity. And in Houston, we routinely have all of these. So sometimes it can be really hard in the summer. So I, in turn, like to blast my car's AC on very low to keep myself relaxed. And I often have a fan on here at home, including right now. And I can struggle when I don't have these things and I'm already stressed out. I have trouble staying in one place when seating isn't comfortable, or I'm waiting in long lines, or if I have to stand at a concert. So over time, I find it harder to be at some of these things. But like people who struggle with physical conditions to cope in their lives, I've had to learn to adapt and have the courage that we all struggle to find, to take a break, cope, or need help, ask for help when we need it. Now, I might even sometimes talk to myself or repeat sounds because they feel good, even though it kind of looks crazy to some people. I also get pretty easily fixated on things or ideas, like unresolved problems, tasks, worries, and stress that I have to deal with. And it's hard for me to leave these things at the door when they overload my senses. So it might seem sometimes like I forgot or didn't listen to what you were saying or didn't care. It's really just because I wasn't able to focus on it. However, this strength of sense that can sometimes get in my way also speaks to me more powerfully than normal. It enables me to have a very keen ear for music and deep appreciation for art. And it also enables me to learn very well through experience rather than just reading directions or rote memorization. And it often makes it difficult for me to forget things. Now, one thing I find amusing when it comes to relationships is that two of the most famous relationships books are called You Just Don't Understand, and Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, because it truly reflects how much adults with autism, even more so than the general population, might struggle to understand the language of relationships, how to start and maintain them, social conventions of dating and romance. And I had very little childhood experience with relationships and emotional closeness. Only recently have I felt this change as I earnestly seek these things with everyone I know and become comfortable with vulnerability and trust in other people. This hasn't been easy because of the amount of rejection I've experienced romantically and personally and even professionally, but it gets easier the more I learn to trust people that I care about. Now, my experience with relationships, accordingly, has been the long and hard road many of us take of learning something new from many different people. I'm grateful, though, for every piece of the puzzle. Now, there's a documentary called Autism in Love about adults with autism seeking and or struggling with romance. And this always strikes me very close to home and sometimes is very difficult to watch. A parent survey on the site Spectrum News found that 67% of parents of children with autism reported their child had no interest in romance, and only 5% had ever been married. Many adults with autism actually find their limitations or barriers to an equitable and healthy relationship, and find some people have a difficult time getting past these things. The intensity of close relationships and how clearly they expose autism's challenges has been a hard battle for me. So I know that I need to have a healthy balance between a partner's support and standing on my own 2 feet, between a helper and someone who will accept me just as I am. Consider that no relationship is perfect, no matter who you are or what you have. But all relationships challenge us. They clarify our strengths and better the imperfections that everybody has. And I want people to know that autism is just one among a million possible challenges, and it should be treated the same way as all others. One that I believe is possible to not just accept, but to overcome. Now, people with autism are often famed for having very special talents drawn from their seemingly obsessive interests that you might remember from one of the most popular movies about people on the spectrum, Rain Man. Raymond had a very special talent for numbers and remembering things, and was able to learn how to count cards in Vegas and make a bunch of money. Now, that's not true for everybody, but for me, there are certain special talents that I have that I've made good use of in my life. My fascination with world cultures drove me to cook food from every country. I'm about 90 countries through right now, and gave me a reputation among my friends as a great cook. And it's enabled me to pick up any language that I set my mind to. The foreign language I speak the best is French. I'm pretty conversational in it. I can speak enough Spanish and Czech to get by. And I can read limited amounts of several other languages also. I was actually able to translate for a French-speaking client at University of Houston Clear Lake's Telehealth World ABA project after just 10 months of studying. And I helped to translate for the Global Autism Project's team to Prague in July after just 7 months. And currently I'm booked to travel to Jakarta, Indonesia next year as a trip leader in training. And thus I've learned to speak Indonesian as well. No previous travel to either of these countries has ever taken up the language. And it's one thing that I'm personally proud of. Now, my intuitive sense and flow for language and the color and nuances that words, rhymes, and images carry also grants me a special talent for writing. When I was growing up, I absolutely hated writing because I didn't feel that I could communicate. And the more that I realized this special talent in me, the more confident I got. And now I've been writing poems and short stories since 2016 as a way to express very complex emotions and understand more about my own feelings and emotions and process major life challenges. And there are times when writing just pours out of me thoughtlessly, and I feel astonished that I actually wrote that, and overwhelmed emotionally, and feel a peculiar warmth and peace coming out of me. It doesn't feel like it's from me, and it's very puzzling sometimes. So you see that autism isn't just woven into my life story, but it actually helps me write it day by day. Now, it's been said occasionally that autism is one word that tells a million different stories. And perhaps my story sounds a lot like yours in some way or another. Perhaps you've always felt like you were a bit different than everyone else, and you couldn't always put your finger on it. And maybe one day you might learn why. What it is, whatever it is, maybe not autism, but something else. Everyone struggles with feeling like they're different than other people and that maybe others don't understand them. But when you do discover your uniqueness, you should never pity yourself or feel inadequate, because you have a voice like everyone else. And you deserve to be treated equally, whoever you are. You deserve to be loved and accepted because you matter. Now, me as a writer, I'm very heavily influenced by a few writers, and one of them is a more obscure Australian sci-fi author named Mark R. Healy. And he once wrote a story called After the Winter that made a deep impression on me. It was about a synthetic human being kind of like in Blade Runner, seeking to return to his human body. And in the big plot twist in the story, he finds out that it never actually existed, and he's never going to become a human being. And this brings him an existential crisis. And then he's able to get himself out of suicidal despair with this epiphany. My creators had made me more human than even they realized. I was imperfect, flawed. I could doubt and suffer and struggle and lose my way. But I could also believe. I could still find the right path in the time I had left. I could never become human, but in all the ways that really mattered, I already was. Now, we can never stop having autism. It'll always be a part of us. But we aren't just machines built to mimic humans, but who will never be like them. They're just as fully human as all of our brothers and sisters, for better and for worse, but in all respects united by the common language of the human condition. And in a world without borders between us, where we all believe in each other's humanity and learn each other's language, people with autism won't live a mechanical existence, falling short of what it could be. But you and I will walk an abundant life together as one. Thank you, merci, dziękuję, gracias, and terima kasih.
Andrew, an excellent talk. Thank you so much. And just there's so many wonderful positive comments both here on our Zoom chat and also over on the Facebook from a lot of your friends. And there's I imagine going to be a lot of reaction and great questions for you. And so here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and we're going to do some discussion rooms in our Zoom chat. And so those will be appearing on your screen in just a second. And then if you're on the Facebook Live, that's also a great opportunity to have some discussion there on Facebook. And so let's take some time to react with each other to Andrew's talk. And then during this time, if you have questions for Andrew, write your questions down either in the Facebook Live comments or here in the Zoom chat. And in 10 minutes, we're going to come back for a little bit of Q&A. And so with that, we'll break off into our discussion. We'll see everybody back in about 10 minutes. Okay, Abhishek, you can give everybody the rundown on the Zoom stuff. I forgot to do that. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Let's see. Almost there on the Facebook, just a second. All right, everybody, welcome back from our discussion rooms. We're going to enter into some Q&A. Before we do that, I want to tell you guys something about something that Andrew has organized, and we're going to post a link for this in the chat. But he has organized a relief fund to help support vulnerable ABA centers around the world in the wake of COVID-19. And so we wanted to make sure to mention that and give everybody an opportunity to check out that donation. So I'm looking over here for your opportunity to donate to that. Sorry, I can't find the Zoom group chat. There it is. Okay, so I posted a link to that in the Zoom chat, and then also there's a link on our Facebook Live. And so please consider giving to that great cause as a way to support the work that Andrew is doing. With that, we do have some questions, Andrew, and in fact, we're going to start over here on Facebook Live from Grant. He's asking, who are some of your favorite authors?
That's a good question, because a lot of people that are in an artistic field have certain influences, and I've had to really think about that because I don't have that many. I've read a lot of books over and over and over and over again, rather than a wide variety of books. But I would say that the ones that I read the most were J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, which was a foundational influence on the way that I write, because the way she is able to elucidate on people's emotions and imagery, especially in one of those final chapters in the 7th book, is like one of the saddest chapters in all of fiction. And just the way that she's able to build a scene and have things happening representing emotional emotions, and able to narrate, really, because I'm not necessarily the best dialogue writer. I just let people's actions and imagery and symbolism kind of tell a story. So that was very foundational, as well as Mark's stories that I mentioned earlier. He's also a musician and has his scripts written over his own original music, actually. So, and just the way that he's able to use so many similes and metaphors and have them have surprise twists has been influential. But some kids writers like E.B. White, with like Charlotte's Web and The Trumpet of the Swan in particular, are two majorly important books to me. The latter being about a swan who can't talk, who learns to play, a trumpeter swan who can't talk, learns to play a real trumpet. And it's like, that's a life-affirming story about someone with a disability who conquers it and actually becomes unique and recognized for his talent. But E.B. White's Charlotte's Web was also special. It's like somebody who's kind of an outcast and doesn't have friends, has one special friend that ends up saving his life. So those are the main ones. It'd be hard to really say a lot of the other ones, but those are my primary influences on the way that I write.
Let's see, we have a question here from Richard in the Zoom. Is love of learning common among people on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, because I saw in here the question, it came across, is love of learning questions common? I'm guessing that's what you mean, is love of learning common among people on the autism spectrum?
Is that right, Richard?
Well, like a lot of other things, it varies from person to person, but it just depends also sometimes on the interests that the person has. There are many things in this world that I couldn't care one whit about, but there are many things that I researched almost obsessively and could be love of learning languages. That might be one thing too. That's just probably a thing that's person to person. For me, it's For me personally, it just happens to be something that I'm very talented at. I've taken classes in even other languages besides the ones that I've done here, and I've excelled at them, but I wasn't always able to continue in those. And I see another question in the chat too that I want to follow up with later as well, that's related to that.
Excellent. And remind me to come back to that, because I am going to jump over just a second to the Facebook. Laura Elaine has asked, what are some of the best moments? What have been some of the best moments working in ABA therapy?
Well, a lot of that is when you make a connection with a parent and they see that their child has progressed in a special way. Maybe they've gotten their first word out of a kid, and that can be no matter who you are, whoever you are as a therapist, you see those special moments and even get to share them with a parent. Those are the things that make all of the work you put into the student and their parents worth it. But for me specifically, if you're asking that question as for me as a person on the spectrum, some of that is also when you make a connection with a parent because they kind of know, or they guessed, or you actually told them. There are some parents that actually did find out. And the vast majority of them have been extraordinarily accepting and appreciative of the passion that I bring to this field and the way that I can relate to their child in a way that maybe some others can't, despite the challenges that I have in this field also. And that was another question I wanted to touch upon.
Yeah, and actually that's a good segue, because that was you had mentioned that question had come up on the Facebook. What is the most difficult part of working in ABA?
Well, most difficult part of ABA therapy is compared to the fact that ABA is very scientifically based. There are laws and guidelines for how behavior works that guide your teaching. So when you go based off of that, somebody on the spectrum can excel in this field. But there's always unknowns, things you have to figure out, or there can be things that change unexpectedly. Kids can have a big tantrum, and you don't necessarily know why, and in the moment you have to figure out what to do. And it may be that you just have to react instinctively or with your best guess. And I don't handle uncertainty as well as some people, but once I get over that hump and I'm able to manage that and able to come to more of a certitude about what I'm supposed to do, I feel a lot more confident. As well as the fact this is a very stressful field to be in. And that's another major struggle that I have. But I think that over time, you just learn to cope and develop strategies for keeping yourself focused, keeping yourself under control. And everybody who deals in this kind of job is going to face that, but it just might be slightly different for us. But with supportive staff and supportive employers, I believe it's possible.
I'm curious if anybody has like to maybe to leave in a video question or comment. If anybody would like to make a question or comment, you can kind of raise your hand there in your box. I have all my gallery view up so I can see all of you. And you may also use the reaction button. How about we go over to, I see you, Megan. Robert, I wasn't sure, was that a question you had? Okay, so no. But Robert did have a question actually in the chat. So while we're on that, that note, he had asked, what are some guidelines to being a good friend to an autistic person?
That's a long question, but I will try to reduce it to a few things specifically. One of them, and this is the major, most important thing that I would say, is see them as a person more than their diagnosis. And I try not to exclude them from things and make sure that they feel that they can be comfortable being who they are, really. I have been in situations where people have been tempted to change me or fix me, and knowing that some people feel that way is it's very painful to know that that's how some people will see me. But there's also people that do honestly try to help me to get better and do it out of sincere care for me, not because they want to see me be like everybody else. but there's always a way that you can try to help people to cope and without necessarily trying to change or fix them. And another thing is to realize that sometimes we need you to reach out to us because we may not always know what to say or how to have a conversation with you or how to be your friend. In my experience, it's mostly me that reaches out to the other person. And there's some friends that take time to look out for me, and maybe even if I'm going through something really difficult, they try to ask a lot of leading questions to get me to figure out what to say when I can't necessarily, or I'm struggling to. And I think it's just being patient and trying to communicate, because sometimes we may struggle with that. That would be another major guideline for how to be a good friend. Mm-hmm.
Let's see, we have a question over. I'll jump back over to the Facebook and make sure these guys are getting some love. Let's see. How about from Amaret? If you have a child with autism, what resources or methods are the most useful for the parents to make sure they can relate to them?
Let me see. Okay, over here. What resources, methods are most useful for parents to make sure that they can relate? As in, can they understand the child's autism or to learn to communicate with them, or what specifically? Because there's things I could say for all of those.
Yeah, Amaret, if you're listening, you might add on a bit to your comment there. And while she tends to be pretty active, so we'll give her some time to clarify.
When we go to another question, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go over to Samia, who has a video question. Samia, you might have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Hi there. Thank you, Andrew. That was absolutely brilliant. I so enjoyed your story and how you told it and how you showed it in your voice and in your pictures, in your slides. That was really remarkable. One of the things that I've seen in families is sometimes the parents are very reluctant to test their children because they assume that they know best for that child, right? So how do you speak to those adults in a way that would say, I think your child needs this to help him cope with life? How would you do that? How would you think you would want to do that?
All right, so let me rephrase your question to make sure I'm understanding, because I think I get what you're saying, but let me make sure. You want to know how to tell parents to seek assistance and support in a way that's not trying to label the child as defective or weak. Okay. I think that usually what I've done, and I have a friend of mine who suspects that her child has some kind of speech disorder or possibly autism. Like, I've just thrown the word out there as a possibility, but also I think that I start first by observing that they struggle in certain areas. So what I would observe was that she's delayed in her speech and can only really babble when she's about 2, and I would try to listen through the parent's story and like how they discovered this, or if this is something that concerns them, but I also want to know a little bit more about their own feelings about their child, because if I feel that this parent would find it really difficult to handle to know that their child might be diagnosed, I'd probably have to do it much more delicately. I'd probably have to first feel them out and see, well, how do you feel about this? And that way, when they get to that point of diagnosis, it might be a little bit easier for them. And it also might make them more willing to try to seek help because they don't see it as something shameful. I know for my friend, she loves this child the way that she is, no matter what. I fell in love when I first met her too, so. But not all parents are gonna be at that point. And to answer one other aspect of that question, it's like telling your friend who's got a lot of serious personal problems to maybe go seek some professional help, and it's something that you have to do very delicately. Um, but I think first hearing them out and hearing what the issue is and asking them what are they doing for it might lead them in that direction. They might spontaneously volunteer it, or you might be able to get them to that point gently. How do you feel about that as an answer?
She's giving jazz hands, which is the Zoom way of saying that we like it. So I should come back to Amarette, because she did clarify, if you have a child with autism, what resources or methods are the most useful for the parents to make sure they can communicate with the child?
Well, communication being a difficult thing for a lot of us, there are a lot of communication systems and methods. For those children that don't have verbal language, there are other avenues of communication, such as picture exchanges or communication devices or things like Proloquo or apps on an iPad. They're all kind of based around a similar thing. And it may also be that they learn to sign for some kids, especially those that don't have verbal language. But what you use is really going to depend on the students' abilities, because each of those has its own strengths and weaknesses as a communication system. And it may also depend on your clinician's expertise if you're getting this taught by a professional. Now, if your student is verbal, then it's also going to be different, because they may have a lot of words, but it's just putting it all together. And especially when you get into the aspect of teaching social skills, you might use things like social stories or put them in social skills groups. I was in one for about a year when I was young, and we think that that was one of the things that was helpful. But you don't necessarily have to just put a kid in a social skills group with a bunch of other people on the spectrum. In fact, I kind of advise against that in some aspects earlier in the presentation, because it doesn't really expose them to the rest of the world out there. I think ultimately it's giving your student the communication skills for whatever they happen to be lacking, and making sure that they're surrounded by an environment that supports them in that. If you teach things at home, but you don't put them in an environment where they're going to use it, it's never going to stick. I hope that was detailed enough, but certainly put something else in the chat if there's anything else that you want.
How about another video comment or question? Anybody that's in our gallery view that might like to ask something? And let's go over to Jeff and Brenda. And you might have to unmute yourself, guys.
I have a similar disorder, OCD, and I had a lot of problem with the religious dilemma that God loves you, but He might send you to hell. And things like that you're taught to believe. Did that bother you as an autistic person?
Do you mean the idea of religion? You mean in
Yeah.
general, or?
Yeah.
Well, full disclosure. So full disclosure, I am Catholic, and it is sometimes a struggle because of certain aspects of that. And it is something that's real for a lot of people, especially people that are no longer religious. It certainly is a struggle because they feel that they've done something wrong, or
Right.
Is that what you mean, sir?
Yeah, trying to figure it out. I mean, being taught something like that and by people you trust, and then it doesn't make any goddamn sense, and you feel in a trap, it was very disturbing. It caused me to have a lot of ruminations as an OCD person.
Well, I can feel you on that, sir, because it's certainly something that I struggle with in my own practice. And I think possibly that I have that form of OCD or some other type of it. I've debated it. I'm not sure. I've considered getting myself evaluated for it, but there could be a lot of things going on. I'm going to admit it's a struggle. So I really sympathize with people that are going through that right now, or people that have found a religious practice to be uncomfortable for that reason. So
yeah, I became an atheist, and that was very very good for me. so I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Mhm.
Well, I think we'll have some more opportunity. Andrew, if you're okay with sticking around for a few minutes after our
Absolutely.
final song here, maybe to answer some last minute questions that have come
There's
through
a
in
lot
our
of other
chat.
questions in there.
Yeah,
that
I
would
know, and I'm
gladly
sorry
answer.
if I should mention, I'm sorry if we didn't get to everybody's question. We're weaving in a few different sources here, but let's all give some jazz hands and applause to Andrew for his great talk, great question and answer session. And somebody mentioned it in the comments earlier about what an excellent writer you are, and it really came through, and an excellent speaker. Andrew, we really just appreciate having you here today, and look forward to having you come back as well. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Before we head to our final song, I'd like to let everybody know that Houston Oasis exists because all of you show up and all of our volunteers. It also exists thanks to your donations. And so we would appreciate it if you are interested in the mission of creating secular community here in Houston, considering donating to Houston Oasis. You can do that with the links in the chat. You can also go to our website, houstonoasis.org, and become a recurring donor as well. And so we'll be posting some more information about that on our Facebook comments as well as our Zoom chat. With that, we're going to head over to the Glen Ackerman Duo for one final song.
And sorry to interrupt, one last thing. If anyone's seen in the Zoom chat, I put an email address you can email me at if your question wasn't answered. And there's certainly questions I'd like to go into more detail on than I already did too as well.
And let's see. Okay, yeah, I got it here. Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. I agree with Abhishek. I like your email address. Manipulator General.
It was named after a song, so I thought it sounded sinister for some reason. That was me when I was a lot younger. So.
All right, Glenn, you guys are good. Go for it.
Hey, thank you so much for having us. We'll play one last song for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2.
Thank you, guys. And the jazz hands go wild on the Zoom. Lots of applause emojis. We appreciate it, guys. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, all of you guys, for joining us. Before we break up, I should let you know, if you had fun this morning, there's more opportunities and more ways to join. Tonight, for example, at 8 o'clock, for those of you that are here in Harris County, there's a lot going on with coronavirus right now. What's happening? Come back at 8 o'clock to find out. Dr. Richard Andrews, Dr. Will Judy. There will be a Zoom session tonight on that. You can find the link for the coronavirus conversation tonight at 8 in our private Facebook, our meetup group, in the email that you got about this meeting on Friday. And then also, you could also join us on Facebook Live. So just go over to our Facebook profile. This Thursday, June 25th at 7 o'clock, virtual trivia is happening right here on the Zoom. The Trivial Quiz Masters were our winners last month. Who's going to dethrone them? Come back Thursday at 7 and find out about that. There's links to register all over the place on our website, everywhere. Go find it. And then I should mention, this is really important. Next Sunday, June 28th, right here at 10:30 in the same exact spot, the American Atheist, Allison Gill from the American Atheist, I should mention, is coming to present the first analysis of the U.S. secular survey that took place last year. It's going to be a big morning. It's actually an event that's co-hosted not just by us, but by Houston Atheists, the Humanists of Houston, Galveston Bay Oasis. So there's going to be a lot more faces here and on our Facebook. Here's the important detail, Houston Oasis folks. Very, very important. In order to attend the Zoom next week, you actually have to register, and then you're going to receive the Zoom invitation via email. So their link to register is at houstonoasis.org and all over the place, but it's also going to be in the normal Friday email as well that you'll get. But just know, if you log on Sunday morning at 10:30 and just look for the meeting ID, you're not going to see it. You'll have to click and put your name and information in, and then you'll get an email with that information. You could still do it Sunday morning, like 5 minutes before it starts, but just know you need to do that. So next Sunday, 10:30. And we're doing that simply because we're expecting a big crowd. So we're actually using a different Zoom platform to do that. So make sure to join us for that. With that, everybody, we appreciate Andrew and the Glen Ackerman Duo and everybody for joining us. And we hope everybody has a great week. Thanks.
And thank you for everybody for coming out and for all of your great questions and for all of your support. And again, if you are interested in supporting the work that I do with the Global Autism Project, the donation link is there as well. And you also have my email address to ask questions that you didn't get answered today. And I can also hook you up with that as well, if you just send me an email.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everybody. All right, so we're off on the